Dirty Birds, what's up? And welcome to another Atlanta Falcons podcast. I am your host, Will McFadden. I am joined by Tori McElhaney. And Tori, we are here to dig into the mailbag. It's going to be a lot of fun. You and I write a mailbag, the mailbox, on atlantafalcons.com. So we are frequently kind of in check with what the fans are talking about, what they're thinking about. But this will give us an opportunity to do it in an audio format and kind of go back and forth and discuss some of the excellent questions that we got. So that is on tap for today. But in case you missed it, be sure to go check out Tori's interview with Leonard Floyd. Obviously, kind of the biggest addition, I think, for Atlanta this offseason so far. So far. But he was sitting in the chair that you are in right now, and you guys had an awesome discussion that ranged everywhere from on the field to on the farm.
Watermelons, barn dominiums. If you've watched the podcast, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, go watch the podcast so you do know what I'm talking about.
There we go. I love the tease. But let's go ahead and get into today's mailbag. We submitted some questions via many different social media platforms. Thank you guys so much. If you did submit a question, we had a lot of great submissions. So let's just start right up at the top.
Okay, I have one for you.
All right.
We're going to start off pretty strong. This is from Lucas, so shout out Lucas for the question. Outside of Drake London and Darnell Mooney, what's the status of the wide receiver room? Expect additions in the draft / free agency?
Yeah.
Where do you stand?
It's a great question because I think the reason this one kind of stood out to me was this offseason has really been about the defense.
Yeah.
Right? Like we ended the year talking about the offense, kind of that last game against Carolina with the explosion of Bijan and Drake and Michael Penix. And it was like, this is the future, right? But since then, it's been all defense and understandably so. So if we're going to kind of take stock of where the wide receiver room stands right now, Drake London, first 1,000-yard season of his career. He is established himself as the true number one receiver, one of the most physical receivers in the league, and I think the future is really bright for him. Darnell Mooney, close
to 1,000 yards.
God, that was
all
that was
I
tough.
wanted. I can't remember if people really remember. He was only 8 yards away.
We had a story ready to go.
We did. We had a story written. I think Amna Sapan wrote it. And we were ready to give him his flowers. We had the graphics made, all of it, and then he's hurt for that final game.
We were on Mooney watch all week long because he was injured report, moving up and net.
I just at one point I was like, just run him out there for one play. Just give him an 8-yard out route,
just a pop pass right over the middle and then get down.
Literally, that's limp.
it.
Yeah, and then we never see him for the rest of the game.
Yep,
but it didn't happen.
But
that's okay though.
He reestablished something that Atlanta had for a long time there, which was two quality wide receivers. You know, if you're looking back to Roddy White, Michael Jenkins, Roddy White, Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley, Mohamed Sanu in there, Russell Gay. There was always a quality number two, and Darnell Mooney is right in that mix. Number three is where it gets interesting. Ray McLeod was great in that area, and he will be back this season, but could they look to get Casey Washington a little bit more involved? Obviously, he developed a great connection with Michael Penix as rookies, but with Michael Penix now the starter, he's going to have an opportunity to build chemistry with kind of everybody else. So I'm curious to see who in-house steps up. But do you think there's a chance that they actually add somebody in the draft?
I think potentially in the later rounds.
With one of the 7th round picks, maybe?
I think at that point, you're just looking for who's the best athlete out there who can come in and give you potentially meaningful special teams reps. You're not really looking for someone who's going to be a day one starter. Sure. But for me, I am packaging those 7th round picks in any way, shape, form I can and trying to get in the 6th, trying to get in the 5th. Which you'd have to package some other things as well. You can't just give 2 7s.
That's because you're afraid of the number 7?
Right,
it's
of course.
For you?
7, 8, 9. Yeah, of course. So stupid. But
content. We're just trying. I know. Guys.
So sure. But at the exact same time, I am so locked in on this defense right now that I'm okay with where this wide receiver room is, because you also brought back Kadarius Hodge, who I thought gave you meaningful relief and was pretty consistent in what he was able to provide this offense. I know he was a Pro Bowler as a special teamer, but I felt like the depth that he provided as wide receiver number 4 or 5, whenever Darnell Mooney had to come out or Drake London had to come out, you felt confident in what Kadarius Hodge was able to provide you in a split-second decision. And so I think that they're okay. You have Drake, you have Darnell, Ray McLeod, Kaderl Hodge, Casey Washington, hopefully taking that next step and coming along, especially to your point. He's probably the one that's worked with Michael Penix the most out of anybody else collectively since they've both been in the building. So to your question, sure, like you could go get another receiver, have another body, but it's not the end all be all if you don't draft a receiver. I'm cool if you want to draft as many defensive players as you possibly can. That's just me though.
And I know that, the Zach Robinson, kind of Sean McVay tree, a lot of 11 personnel, but you do still have Kyle Pitts in the building. You do still have John Robinson and Tyler Algier, and there are weapons to go around. So even if it's not a wide receiver.
Charlie Warner sightings,
I knew you were guys. I didn't even want to mention his name because I knew it'd be the first coming out of your mouth.
One or two passes to Charlie Warner like every 3 games.
All right.
That's all I need.
I've got a question for you. It comes from Trevor.
Trevor!
This is about a former Falcon, but somebody near and dear to our hearts. How will the Falcons replace Grady Jarrett?
It's a great question. I think that it's actually going to be, and I've said this I did a down in our studio. I actually came straight up from recording this with Taylor Vismore.
Busy woman. Busiest woman in the world.
Literally, I've recorded a studio show, now doing a podcast. Probably going to write later, maybe do some meetings.
I can already feel my voice going. How do you do this?
It's the coffee. Okay. It's the coffee. It really just helps me out, recenters me. But I was talking to Taylor Vismore, and she kind of asked a very similar question. I was like, it's going to be by committee. There's no replacing Grady Jarrett one for one, whether you're talking leadership qualities, whether you're talking the experience level, kind of the fear that he evokes, I think, in offensive coordinators' minds, and also, let's be honest, production too. Yeah. I know production wasn't really there for him as we've known it to be in the last 2 years as he was coming off of that injury, but Grady Jarrett was someone who produced, whether you saw it on a stat line or you didn't. He was affecting the game. So I think that there's no one-of-one replacement for Grady Jarrett. It's going to be David Onyemata, Zach Harrison, Rukaroro, Brandon Dorlus, Morgan Fox, like these guys, Kentavious Street, Taquan Graham, these guys collectively and the rotation that Jeff Ulbrich and Raheem Morris ultimately come to about how they can solidify this interior of the defensive line, because that to me is how you go about moving forward with this defensive interior without someone like Grady Jarrett in the fold anymore.
Yeah, and I was actually just looking up to see when his last season was, because I was trying to think, did Raheem Morris go through something like this in LA with Aaron Donald leaving? But their last seasons were together. Yeah. So it is going to be a little bit of a new experience, but I will give the front office credit. It does seem like there was foresight to this, because last year, when they just kind of ran on the defensive line there in round 2, 3, 4, I was like, all right, everybody wanted them to draft defense. They went quarterback in the first round, and then they were like, we heard you loud and clear, defense. Yeah. And now it's time for those guys to step up, as you mentioned. Yes. And I think the rotational aspect of it is something Leonard Floyd touched on in his introductory press conference, which it's a basketball rotation is kind of what he said. You need guys to come in here with fresh legs, because who plays every snap? Offensive linemen. Those guys don't come off the field. So if you are in the midst of a long drive, and it's why you see teams really start to, I think, lean on no huddle and stuff like that, it's because they want to keep things the same. Right. If our offensive linemen are staying out here, your defensive linemen are staying out here too, and we're going to equalize that. But if you can get a rotation really going and get everybody in the flow, and the Falcons are set up, I think, pretty well to do that, then the sum of the whole could be better than the individual parts.
Agreed. So I want to move forward to something that I feel like we haven't talked a lot about in this offseason. It's kind of flown under the radar a little bit, but it's going to matter significantly when you get to the 2025 season because of how close these games are. And that's, what are the Falcons going to do with their kicker situation? And I'm going to preface this by saying Younghoe Koo has been so clutch and so good for a very long time for this team. But he was going through something last season and missed some key field goals that we've become trusting in him to make. Yes. And then he was placed on injured reserve with a hamstring injury. Like there was a lot going on in the kicking game last year that I think has flown under the radar in the offseason because of how much we're looking at the defense. But Alicia, our girl Alicia, like
shout out.
She asked, she was like, is Younghoe Koo our trusted kicker still? And do we expect competition to come in the building? I know exactly where I stand. I'm curious where you stand on this.
Yeah, I do believe competition is coming. In fact, Raheem Morris pretty much said as much at his end of season press conference. It's very clear that 2024 was an uncharacteristic year for Younghoe Koo.
Yeah.
However, and I do believe that injuries played some sort of role in how all of that went down. Obviously, you mentioned he went on injured reserve. So anytime that you get, because kicking is almost like closer to golf than anything else. Like if you think about it, a kicker's leg is the golf club.
Well, even Younghoe Koo himself used this really awesome analogy about halfway through the season about essentially changing where he's hitting his foot on the ball, comparing it to a pitching
the strike
wedge.
plane. Yep.
Yeah, it was very. I've gone back and I think it was Joe Patrick who was talking to him about it, and I've gone back multiple times and to hear what Younghoe Koo was saying about it.
Yeah, I spoke to him because I was working out one morning, and this is the way my brain works, is I was doing the leg extensions, and I was just like, I wonder if kickers, if this is all they do in the gym all day long, just to develop that extension muscle. So me being me, I walked right up to Younghoe Koo and I was like, hey man, do you only leg extend? Is that all you're doing?
The only thing you do?
And he was like, funny enough, I don't actually do a ton of weight training.
Right.
He does, it's core.
Yeah.
You've got to keep everything tight. And what he said is really it's your hips because you're generating so much torque on the ball when you're kind of rotating your core muscles there that you've got to keep everything locked in place. And so having a tight core helps keep everything where it should be. So when I saw that it was a right hip injury that ultimately landed him on that injured reserve, I was like, all right, that checks out. If things are that's not the area that you want to be dinged up if you are a kicker because of how it impacts the whole mechanics of everything. And the golf metaphor, if you hurt your back, your golf game is gone. It's kind of the same thing, I think, with a hip and a kicker.
Yeah, I agree. But I do think that to bring us full circle,
they could bring
you. I think you have to.
I agree.
I think that you have to bring in competition and you have to solidify the kicking game. And you hope that, I think Younghoe Koo has more than played up to giving him the chance to rectify things.
He's earned the right to at least compete for the job.
Right.
Yep.
And so I think that Younghoe Koo is going to continue to be on this roster. But I do fully believe the Falcons are going to bring in competition for him to see what the best direction to go moving forward is. And if it's one of those situations where he doesn't live up to what the Falcons need him to, it's another Grady Jarrett situation where it's you have to part ways with someone who has been kind of a centerpiece for your team for the last few years and been so reliable and so good. But at the end of the day, it's there has to be, this is a business, and you have to see. With Grady, it was they needed that $16 million in cap space. Yeah. With Younghoe, you need those points.
Yes, that's really, really well said. So I'm not even going to try to add to it. We'll move right on to our... I love how you were just I did something so good that you can't even say anything about it. Let's
move forward.
That was so funny. That was such older sister vibes from you. All right, this next one comes from Brandon. Tori, how likely will the Falcons be, or how likely is it that the Falcons add another center in the draft after they've lost Drew Dahlman?
So I actually got this question. This is something that has been really interesting because in the last week and a half, I think I even told you this morning, I feel I've been asked a lot of questions about the center position in Atlanta.
It's the chatter.
It's the chatter for some reason.
The algorithms are feeding center position to everybody.
I'm just shocked. And for me, it's almost like a non-question because I feel very confident in what the Falcons have in Ryan Neusel. And so if we're talking about, let's just talk about going forward into this offseason and into the 2025 year, I think it makes the most sense. They put a tender on restricted free agent Ryan Neusel, which essentially...
Is it the right of first refusal?
Yes, okay. Yeah. And it's essentially if he gets an offer somewhere else, the Falcons can match it.
Yeah.
Or have the chance to match it.
Right.
So to me, he's coming back. He will be your starting center barring anything crazy in 2025, which I think makes the most sense because, hey, he started 8 games last season. He played well in those 8 games.
He did. Yeah.
And I feel like when you are having this like first time true QB1 in Michael Penix, having someone who had at the center position who has been in this system for a long time, has played beside Chris Lindstrom and Matthew Bergeron for a long time, whether it be in practice or in games, that matters.
Yes.
So you have someone already in the building who has taken significant reps with Michael Penix just in general. So that's good. So I'm all in on Ryan Nuzul. The question, though, how likely would the Falcons add another center in the draft since losing Drew Dahlman? I go back to the first question about that you were asking about, do the Falcons draft a wide receiver? And I'm like, sure, if you want to. Like, I got asked, like, would the Falcons use a second-round pick on a center? And I was like, that's too high. I am in the first round, like, edge rusher, corner safety. In the second round, edge rusher, corner safety.
You were
in the third round,
gosh,
like,
anti-trench Tori over here.
I am so...
Ignore the trenches. That's Tori's message to everybody.
My thing is like, I can't... when I'm breaking down what this 53-man roster looks like, those are the areas that I'm like, okay, based on what I'm looking at in the draft and where I value guys in the draft, like, and where the Falcons are picking, like, those are the positions that I'm like, you could go and get someone who can be a playmaker right now. Not saying that you can't in the interior defensive line or at center, but because you feel good about what you have in Ryan Nuzul, it almost makes this center conversation, like, you put a pin in it. I don't think it's something that you have to fully put all 10 toes in the water for. I don't think that's an expression at all.
We'll go with it. It is now.
But I don't think it's one of those things where you put everything in on the center position in 2025. 2026, let's start looking at maybe a second-round pick potentially. Or if you go out on the free agency market and there's somebody who you really like, who you could bring in and you have more money to play with. So to answer this question, let's put a pin in it. Okay. If they want to draft a center in the 4th round and like kind of bring in some competition for Ryan Nuzul, I think you have to find somebody to kind of be that number 2. But to me, it's not like they are looking for a starter in the draft at that position.
I agree. And I think back to a conversation I had a long time ago at this point. It may have been with former GM Thomas Dimitroff, but it was about the philosophy of an offensive line group, right? And he always would compare it to a link in a chain, right? And it's more about having no bad links. As long as like kind of each link is okay, the whole chain should be pretty strong. If you've got one weak link, then your chain starts to get a little iffy and compromised. I don't think Ryan Nuzul is a weak link at all.
I don't either. I think he's proved, like, over the 8 games that we saw him in, I think, like, there are some limitations in his game. There are limitations in Drew Dahlman's game.
But he's next to Matthew Bergeron and Chris Lindstrom and Jake Matthews is over there. Like, that's where I think still the sum of all of the parts of Atlanta's offensive line with the continuity that Dwayne Ledford brings as the coach and that group coming back, like, it could still be a very good group.
I think I even wrote this in the mailbag that ran on Wednesday on AtlantaFalcons.com. I was like, having Chris Lindstrom to the right of whoever is at that center position.
Number 1 right-hand man in the league.
Literally, I was like, Chris Lindstrom makes up for, I think, a lot of deficiencies that you may think you have at the center position simply because of the way Chris Lindstrom plays the game and how good he is.
Yeah.
And I think that is something I don't want people to miss is like, okay, I know that there's a lot of like chatter right now, weirdly, about the center position, what the Falcons are going to do, and do they need to prioritize this? And it's like, I'm okay with where they are because Ryan Nuzul did some good things in those 8 games. He has some places where he needs to step up, of course. But Chris Lindstrom's there. And I'm like, it'll be fine. Yep. It'll be okay.
100%.
Okay, let's move forward, though. Speaking of, it'll be fine. It'll be okay.
This is fine.
So Andre, he said, we need a quarterback opposite A.J. Terrell, correct? So my question is, why wouldn't we look to add Asante Samuel Jr., solid quarterback, and he's only 25 years old?
Well, Andre,
your thoughts.
I would refer you back to the conversation that Tori and I had in this very studio about the cornerback free agents, where we did talk about Asante Samuel Jr. And he's a player I like a lot. Yeah. I think that he's out in L.A. with the Chargers. Like, he's had some ups and downs. He's been a solid player by and large for a secondary that is not too dissimilar, I think, from Atlanta, like where there's some known players around the league, but have they ever been among the dominant groups? No. And so I kind of think that Asante Samuel is a player that I like. However, Mike Hughes did more than enough last year in a starting capacity to earn the contract that he did and come back and be that number 2 corner across from A.J. Terrell. So I kind of think I like the continuity that they're developing there. When you're also bringing back Jesse Bates, really it's just Jordan Fuller as kind of that new face in your secondary. And I think they could draft somebody. Like when we're looking at the number 15 pick, let's say there is a run on edge rusher and the Falcons aren't able to get, and you're left there with, I don't know, like Donovan Ezzie, I don't even want to say his last name, but the kid out of Boston College. Yes. Like, let's say he's sitting there and it's like one other guy who maybe you have a second round grade on, and then you got like Will Johnson or you got Jahdae Barron or one of those guys. And yeah, if you feel, hey, this guy's a better impact player, what do we always say? The secondary and the pass rush have to work hand in hand, right? I know fans probably are bristling against that a little bit because usually that means that the team's going to take a member of the secondary. And I think the pass rusher needs to be the pick this time around.
I do too.
But they could always add a corner in the draft.
Yeah, and I think that so this was also something that playing around with, I think re-signing Mike Hughes, I was a big proponent of bringing him back. I think I wrote about it a couple of times. Like, you should probably bring back Mike Hughes because I liked what I saw from him as the second option opposite A.J. Terrell. And so they do bring him back. He's here for 3 more years under this contract. And I think what his signing ultimately provides is the flexibility for the Falcons potentially in the first round or second round, or if they can get in the third round, which, like, let's see if they can do that. I do think that having him on the roster and feeling confident and trusting in him allows the Falcons this flexibility to prioritize corner or nickel.
Yes.
Because he can play corner or nickel. So if you find that in the second round, let's say things are falling a certain way, you edge rusher in the first round. Number 15, you get an edge rusher. In the second round, I think you could go outside corner or slot. And according to what is the best option there, you move Mike Hughes to the other side. Or, you know, I just think it's like interchangeable.
Yeah.
And I think that opens up a lot of possibilities for the Falcons and gives them a little bit of like peace of mind a little bit on the second day of the draft to be like, okay, we know we're going after someone in the secondary and we have the pieces to place where we need to. That kind of opens things up for us in terms of who we can go after and who we can prioritize.
Yeah, I think you're seeing positional flexibility really become something that this defense has because I think back to what they did with Kevin King last year in preseason and then kind of like late in the year as well with this almost like big nickel. Yeah. That's essentially what it is. It's like that jack position or that star kind of player. But when you've got DeMarco Hellams coming back, and I know they like his physicality as a player, like I envision a role for him maybe closer down to the box. I do think Divine Diablo, you know, the greatest name in the league. He's got some of those traits as a former safety as well. So, yeah, I really like what you said about how Mike Hughes, like, it makes sense. All of the pieces that they've added do have some of that positional flexibility, which only allows you to keep more options on the table and not kind of box yourself into a need. Yeah. And that is the key thing for Atlanta in the draft is we don't want to have to be drafting for needs. They are aware of the needs. It's part of the formula, but you don't want to box yourself into it.
Right. And I think that it's a good point that you make is like you don't really know how things are going to fall the first round of the draft and what could happen when the Falcons are ultimately on the clock at number 15 and who's available. If there is a run on edge rushers, could the Falcons accrue more draft capital, move down and trade down in that first round and go after a corner or a safety?
Max Hairston, Trey Amos, those guys.
Yes, or can they figure out a way? This is a move that Terry Fontenot loves to do, is kind of scooting up in the second round by any means necessary. I don't know. There are a lot of possibilities, and it's something that I'm really curious about because I think that the Falcons are in this interesting spot where they don't have a lot of capital to play with, but that doesn't mean that moves can't be made.
Right. Yep. I completely agree. And I think there could be a creative move or two, maybe something that we don't normally see or is a little bit on the rarer side. But again, I think anything is on the table. Let's go ahead and wrap up with our last question. And this is kind of a fascinating one that got us talking a little bit about before the podcast because we were just like, is this this true? Is this? And we were digging into it.
Right.
So it comes from Zach, who asks, in 2024, the Falcons were statistically one of the worst tackling teams in the league. Why should we expect that to improve in 2025?
It's funny because Will was going through the rundown of what questions he had pulled from you guys, and he got to that one, and I was like, what are the... I was standing there, I was like, what are the numbers?
You were like, show your math.
I was like, show me what the numbers are.
Do it
like,
all
what
in
are
my head, Miss Tori.
What are the missed tackle percentages? Like, what are we talking about here? Because just off the top of my head, we kind of were going back and forth. It's like, okay, there were missed tackles in that Washington game. I was like, okay, there's that last Carolina game, there were missed tackles, but like fundamentally, how bad was it? Like when statistically one of the worst tackling teams is what Zach is saying. So you have the numbers.
Yeah,
we were looking
it's quite a statement, right? So statistically, they finished with the 9th most missed tackles last year, 114, which the Colts were last. They had 157 missed tackles. So, you're not like near that end of the deep end, but the Steelers led the league with only 69 missed tackles. So there's clearly a lot of work that you can do. And more importantly, this is a downward trend for Atlanta in recent years. We went back and looked at the 2022 season, for example. Atlanta had the 3rd fewest missed tackles with only 54. Mm-hmm. In 2023, they rose a little bit in that and kind of were more in the middle of the pack, but still on the bottom end and had only 95 missed tackles. Yeah. So again, this is something that over the last couple of years has been a creeping problem, I would say, for Atlanta. And when we even dig into who are the specific players, it's kind of some players who are no longer on the team, which should help, but also some key players that you're going to be relying on throughout the year. So I don't know. Do you think this is more of a coaching thing? Do you think this is more of the personnel? And it's a little bit like, hey, if you're a good tackler, you're going to be a good tackler kind of wherever you go because it's more of an innate quality with a player? Or do you believe that this is a coaching trait that you just got to spend more time hitting those pads?
It's hard because, like, especially with the way that practices are kind of ran
it's
now,
tough,
you can't. There's not a lot of live tackling,
right?
And it's very much like frowned upon. Like you aren't allowed to live tackle. That's not something you're allowed to do. Like training camp, the one time in the preseason that you really get to put pads on somebody, but you can't really take them to the ground is in joint practices. Mm-hmm. And that's the first time that your starters get the chance to do that. So I think it's a little bit of kind of all-encompassing. But at the exact same time, it's really hard to answer the question of like why should we expect that to improve in 2025? I guess like my thing is like this is not something that I think you can like outright predict because literally 2 years ago we're talking about Atlanta being one of the best tackling teams in the league, and now we're talking about them being one of the worst tackling teams in the league, and with relatively some of the same pieces here and there. I think it's I don't want to say it's kind of a byproduct of the way that the game has evolved, but to a certain extent, I still kind of feel that way. I think that there are systems in place that, for better or for worse, I think you can kind of debate it, like the way that certain tackling is called and officiated, and there are rules, and you can't live tackle in the preseason truly until you get to the preseason games, and even then it's not your starters who are tackling.
Yeah, and some teams employ kind of the rugby style tackling where your head is on the backside of the player. Some still go head across the body. So it's there.
I think there's a lot more nuances. Yeah, I think there's a lot more nuances to this question than simply, oh, the Falcons are bad at tackling and it's a coaching problem or it's a player problem. I think it's too big of a question to find one specific answer, which maybe I'm, naive to that. Maybe someone is out there listening being like, no, the problem is this. And if it is, put it in the comments. But I do think that it's a bit more holistically nuanced answer that I don't think I have at this point in time.
Yeah, to me, I don't know if missed tackles or tackling in general is like the stickiest stat from year to year. I do think it's one of those where you can see it fluctuate, right? Like the Detroit Lions in 2023 had some of the most missed tackles in the league, which I think would shock a lot of people, right? You think Dan Campbell, you think that defense, Aaron Glenn, like tough, physical, we're not missing tackles. But they bounced right back last year, and they were, again, one of the best teams in terms of the least amount of missed tackles. So I do think it's a little bit of a focus thing, just like what are you focusing on and prioritizing and things like that. So we'll see how, obviously Jeff Ulbrich in here as the new defense coordinator, what he's prioritizing. But yeah, it was a really interesting note. Like I thought it was an interesting question. Yeah. It got us to do some of that research because anecdotally, it did feel like in some moments, you think back to the Washington game, you mentioned the Carolina game, like, yeah, late in the year, missed tackles started to pop up for this team.
And also, you even think back, and this just popped into my head too, like how many mobile quarterbacks the Falcons faced in the first 5 weeks of the season, and like how many of those moments where you could have brought down someone like a Jalen Hurts or Patrick Mahomes, these guys, Justin Fields, these guys who are moving out of the pocket and scrambling and picking up a bunch of yards. Like there were missed tackles in the backfield there. And so I think that also, it could also be a big conversation about like if you were to break down every team and what opponents they were playing, what style of running back they were playing, what style of quarterback they were playing, based on if there was a correlation between these more like run heavy offenses versus kind of the teams that had a bigger margin of missed tackle percentages. I wonder if there's a correlation there. It's a good think piece.
Yeah, I also think, the Falcons played a number of big wide receivers last year. CeeDee Lamb, DK Metcalf, like A.J. Brown. Those guys are tough to tackle one-on-one. So if you're getting a player out in space, it's going to be a tough proposition for you. But again, fascinating question. We'll see. We'll stay tuned. Put a pin in it.
Stay tuned. We'll maybe figure it out. We maybe won't.
Speaking of staying tuned, Tori, you've got a big week next week. You're going to be heading down to league owners meetings. Yeah. What's the kind of number one thing you're most looking forward to learning down there?
Well, I think that the biggest thing that's probably going to be asked of Raheem Morris of Arthur Blank is going to continue to be the Kirk Cousins-ness of it all, the Cousins conversations that I'm trademarking. Okay. Like, I do think that is going to prevail as the topic of conversation. What do the Falcons do with Kirk Cousins? And what are conversations like? Are there conversations happening? It's been reported that Kirk Cousins had a meeting with Arthur Blank. Would Arthur Blank be willing to talk about what that meeting entailed?
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
Right, like these are, I think that is the biggest part of all of this, because at this point in time, the Falcons aren't really moving in free agency, like in terms of like big moves. They didn't make any huge moves in free agency, took a more like precise and conservative approach to who they were going out and getting and who they were retaining. And then they only have 5 picks in the NFL draft, so not as many as some other teams where they could move around and do some different things. So I think that whereas last year is like, there were a list of things that I was ready to talk to Terry Fontenot, Arthur Blank.
Oh, yeah.
Like, because Kirk Cousins was new and
Raheem Morris
was new. It was like, it was very different going down to owners meetings last year in comparison to this year, because it's like there aren't as many questions, but the questions are pretty big in terms of the direction that this team goes with someone like Kirk Cousins.
Awesome. Well, yeah, we may do a real quick touch base from owners meetings for a podcast next week, but we may not, depending on if there is news to cover. So just be on the lookout on the feed. We will be back next week with another podcast for you guys. Getting ready for the draft. I mean, like April is almost here. We're going to turn the page. It kind of feels like this, in my mind, was a little bit of we're putting free agency to bed type of conversation. So get ready. We've got a lot of draft content coming down the pipe for you all, both on the podcast feed and on AtlantaFalcons.com. So be sure to check it out for your daily Falcons coverage. But until then, everybody, for Tori McElhaney, I'm Will McFadden. We will see you guys next time.